If you look at the history of the Cold War, on an alarmingly large number of occasions, we came extremely close to having a general nuclear war between the two sides, the Soviet Union and the US, by accident or at a period of heightened tension. On one occasion, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the only reason why we didn't have it was because of an extremely brave Russian submarine officer who refused to let his commander attack fire missiles on an American ship. So a major argument I make in the book is that you shouldn't make predictions. Predictions are a total waste of time, really. What you should do is think of this as being a bet, if you will. Let's say you know that in any 1 year, there is a 1 in 1,000 chance of a global disaster that, wipes out most of humanity, for the sake of argument. Are you prepared to take that bet? That's the kind of way to think about this in terms of betting. Now, however, the second thing which follows that is, okay, let's say you're not prepared to take the bet. You therefore think you should take certain kinds of precautions, insurance steps, things you can do that might either make the thing less likely, raise it to a 1 in a million chance rather than a 1 in 1,000 chance, or that would protect against it should it happen, mitigate the effects. Now, the thing is that those possible steps will be costly. They're not cost-free. Nothing is costly. So what economists can help you think about is the balance of costs and benefits. What amount of money is it, or resources, is it worth investing to protect against a risk which, should it happen, will have catastrophic consequences? Now, the answer in some cases is not a lot. It's never zero, though. There are some things, a kind of very minimal level of resource expenditure, which is worth making even for really trivial risks. But it's very low. In a global sense, it's nothing. But for other ones where the risk is higher, like the risk of a serious natural pandemic, for example, a Black Death level pandemic or higher, or the risk of a major solar flare, a Carrington event type solar flare, then it's worth spending quite a bit because the probability is higher and therefore it's worth doing it. The other thing economics tells us is that you can use the two other things. One is you can use the price mechanism in various ways to work out what trade-offs you're prepared to make. So let's say you think that there is a serious risk of an abrupt climate switch or a catastrophic change in the Earth's climate, which could happen for natural reasons. In fact, that's more likely, actually. What amount of resources would it be worth putting in to mitigate the possible effects of such an event? And that's where you need to have a conversation, basically, about, well, okay, it means using some resources for this that you would otherwise use for something else. How far are you prepared to go? And you need a social conversation. And you can't do that unless the economists are there to help out. So that's another important feature of the way economists can contribute to this.
What global catastrophic risk are you most worried about?
I think there's two or three which I would put at equal level. One is the risk of a nuclear war. I think that we have become seriously complacent about this. Recent events perhaps have made us a bit less complacent, but if you look at the history of the Cold War, on an alarmingly large number of occasions, we came extremely close to having a general nuclear war between the two sides, the Soviet Union and the US, by accident or at a period of heightened tension. On one occasion, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the only reason why we didn't have it was because of an extremely brave Russian submarine officer who refused to let his commander attack fire missiles on an American ship. And the thing is that, okay, you could say, well, no, it didn't happen, we survived, but that's not a reason for being reassured and thinking the risk has gone away. That's like playing Russian roulette, and you think, oh, I pulled the trigger 20 times and I still haven't blown my brains out. Well, that is not good thinking. So nuclear war is definitely one of them, and we should be thinking much more seriously about that. Another one that I am worried about is the one I mentioned a moment ago, which is large coronal mass ejections, very large solar flares. These are an example of something which is a risk now, but wasn't 300 or even 100 years ago. So back in 1859, there was a very large solar flare. And at the time, so-called Carrington event, at the time, all it did was create some really spectacular northern lights. Wasn't no damage done, really, apart from a few telegraph lines burning out. But at that time, nothing relied upon electricity. There was no electrical grid, there were no electrical appliances. the best estimate that has been done by Lloyd's of London is that were an event of a similar size to happen now, it would cause catastrophic grid failure across large parts of the planet, and it would burn out huge numbers of appliances. They estimate that it would cost anything up to 15% of global GDP, which as a one-off hit is absolutely enormous. I mean, that's a disaster. Maybe not quite a catastrophic loss, but getting very close. We nearly had such an event in 2012. The sun had a flare which was the same size as the one in 1859, but it missed Earth by about 10,000 miles, which in cosmic terms is nothing. So we've had a high risk. Now the mathematics works out that it's about a 0.3% chance. It's a 1 in 300 year event, a really big flare of that kind. And there have been ones that are much, much more powerful. There was one back in the 8th century, for example, that was 10 times more powerful than a Carrington event. Another one in the 13th century of similar power. So that's a risk which I'm quite alarmed about. Fortunately, there are relatively simple things you can do to protect against it, which we probably should be doing anyway, because they would make our power grids more resilient.
For instance,
hardening the grid, basically, and also having a grid which is more decentralized, so that it can't be knocked out by the failure of a relatively small number of key points in the grid network. And we should probably be looking to do this anyway. I mean, there are good reasons for doing that, quite apart from this. So that's the second one that I'm quite worried about. And the third one is the one I sort of alluded to, which is excessive systemic complexity. I think that's a quite a serious risk in a way that is, well, Oliver Letwin, for example, the late former cabinet minister, had a whole book about this a couple of years ago. Called Apocalypse How was what his book was called.
How, yeah.
What for that man for 5 years to begin with?
Anyway, well, I thought the book was quite good, actually. And the point is that it's about cascading systemic failure. And I think that is quite a big problem, mainly because it makes a number of the other possible risks much higher than they would otherwise be. We could probably survive quite a lot of the things that, could happen without them causing a catastrophe if it were not for the fragility of a lot of our systems.